Imagine a dictator, a guy who has just been legally officially removed from power.
Right, like the paperwork is signed,
Exactly. The binding resolutions are signed, the transfer of authority is totally complete, and the new leadership has been formally recognized on the global stage.
but he doesn't leave.
No, he barricades himself inside the presidential palace and just flat out refuses to leave. He's no longer legally in charge, but he's still heavily armed. He's issuing these frantic orders, and he's basically creating absolute chaos.
The great image?
Yeah, keep that image in mind because it is the central key to unlocking one of the most notoriously complex chronological puzzles in human literature.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are bringing you into a highly specific, totally non traditional framework that attempts to flawlessly integrate the timelines of two notoriously dense biblical texts, Daniel and Revelation. Yeah, and I mean, it is the ultimate chronological challenge for anyone studying eschatology.
Mhm.
Historically, scholars looking at these texts have been really heavily tempted to just, jam the various overlapping numbers together.
Right, all the 1260 days and the 42
And the
months.
1290 days, exactly. They try to force them into a single concurrent time frame, whether those pieces actually fit together mechanically or not.
So today we are looking at a source that absolutely refuses to do that. Our material is a position paper by Alan S.L. Wong, and it's titled The Sequential Nested 1290 Model, which, it relies on a very rigorous visual architecture. And before we go a single step further, I need to make something crystal clear to you listening right now.
Very important point here.
Yes, we're absolutely not taking sides here.
We aren't endorsing or, promoting or validating the theological, historical, or political realities of these texts.
Not at all. We are purely here to impartially report on Wong's model. Our mission today is just to act as your tour guides, to appreciate the sheer mechanical architecture of how he pieces this massive chronological puzzle together.
It's really about the mechanics of the timeline.
Right. We want to extract those genuine aha moments by looking at the underlying logic of it all. Okay, let's unpack this. Wong's model is built on a very specific premise. It takes the numbers in the book of Daniel with full, unflinching chronological seriousness.
He insists on letting the data dictate the model.
Exactly, rather than forcing the text into traditional frameworks.
And to understand the scale of what he's doing, you really have to visualize this massive cascading timeline where every single day, I mean, every day is accounted for. Wong is creating a strictly sequential, testable structure here.
Right.
And to understand it, we kind of have to establish the foundational runway, right? The base upon which this entire model rests before we get to the literal end of the world.
Yeah, the baseline here is a 7 year period. In prophetic days, that is exactly 2,520 days. And Wong's model splits this perfectly down the middle into two distinct 1,260-day eras.
Two equal halves.
Right. The first 1,260 days is an era defined by what the text calls harlot dominance. So we were talking about the Babylonian religious and political system being entirely in charge of the global stage.
But the crucial variable for Wong's timeline is the status of the temple in Jerusalem during this first half.
Okay, so what is happening with the temple?
Well, the temple is up and running. According to Revelation 11.1 and Daniel 12.11, the regular sacrifices are continuing without any interruption.
Okay.
It is a period characterized by preparatory warning judgments, sure, but the religious political dominance of that harlot system is the defining geopolitical feature of this entire first half.
But they don't have the stage entirely to themselves, right? Because Wong places the ministry of the two witnesses squarely in this first half.
Yes, he does.
And reading through the source, the dynamic feels incredibly tense. It's like you have this corrupt, globally dominant establishment and power, but then you have these two divinely appointed counter voices openly calling them out.
Right, publicly confronting this Babylonian deception.
For exactly 1,260 days. It plays out like the first act of a political thriller. You have these massive whistleblowers just refusing to back down.
Yeah, they act as a constant, severe thorn in the side of the dominant system.
Hmm.
And Wong places them here specifically because their ministry is a direct counter to the harlot's deception, not the beast's later reign.
Got it.
But no, an era can only last so long. The climax of this first period happens at the very end of those initial 1,260 days.
Right, a major shift
A
happens.
huge shift. The beast finally steps onto the world stage in a definitive way. He kills the two witnesses, and the harlot system is completely overthrown.
So the whistleblowers are taken out, the old regime falls, and we get this decisive transition into the second half of the timeline. The resulting power vacuum is just filled instantly.
Instantly. And this launches us directly into the second 1260 days.
Okay.
This is a 42-month period where the beast exercises what Wong explicitly defines as his sanctioned reign. He is given allotted legal authority over the globe.
He's officially in charge.
Right. He implements his mark, achieving total political and economic domination. Persecution against anyone defying him intensifies rapidly. The regular temple sacrifices are forcefully stopped, and the text states that the city of Jerusalem is trampled for 42 months.
Okay, wait, hold on. That doesn't make sense mechanically.
What do you mean?
Well, if the beast has total global economic dominance and is literally trampling the city of Jerusalem for 42 months, why doesn't he just kick down the doors of the temple on day one? If he's fully in charge, how does the temple itself remain protected from him?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that exact tension is where Wong's model fundamentally diverges from traditional frameworks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, many end times timelines assume the beast does just walk right in. They put the abomination of desolation, the moment the beast desecrates the temple and demands worship right at the midpoint.
Like kicking off that second 1260 days.
Exactly. But Wong argues that doing so directly contradicts the source text.
Because if he sets up his image in the temple on day one of his reign, the temple is in a state of desecration for the entire 42 months.
Right, which doesn't fit. So Wong points specifically to Revelation 11.1 to 2 and Zechariah chapter 2 to solve this. In those texts, the outer court and the city are given over to be trampled by the nations, but the inner temple itself is measured.
Measured, meaning what?
In this specific prophetic context, measuring denotes divine protection.
Yeah.
You can conceptualize it like Zechariah's wall of fire. The city is brutally occupied, but the temple is a distinctly preserved sacred object.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the beast literally cannot cross the threshold yet. His domination surrounds the perimeter, but the sanctuary remains completely off limits.
So it basically acts like an impenetrable embassy situated right in the middle of a violently occupied capital city.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Yep.
Separating the fate of the city from the fate of the temple is exactly what resolves the paradox. The beast's sanctioned authority allows him to conquer the political and economic spheres, sure, but his jurisdiction does not extend into the measured sanctuary.
So he's got limits.
Right. And this raises an important question regarding those limits. Since his reign is strictly capped at 42 months, what happens to the timeline when that expiration date actually arrives?
The clock runs out. I mean, the timeline has to cross a critical threshold where that legitimate sanctioned power is officially stripped away. And in Wong's model, that specific mechanism is the seventh trumpet.
The seventh trumpet is the decisive hinge in the entire chronological architecture.
The turning point.
Exactly. When it sounds, the text in Revelation explicitly declares the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ.
Okay.
And Wong interprets this not just as a vague theological statement, but as a formal legal transfer of royal authority in the heavenly court. The beast's sanctioned 42-month reign is officially terminated at that exact second.
Bam. It's over.
Right. What's fascinating here is how Wong's model requires the reader to distinguish between sanctioned authority and residual power.
Oh, and that distinction brings us right back to the analogy from the beginning of the deep dive.
The evicted tenant.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. The source compares the beast at this crucial juncture to a tenant whose lease has completely expired. The landlord has officially transferred the property deed. The beast's 1,260 days are up.
But he doesn't pack his bags and politely vacate the premises.
No. He is now an unlawful occupant acting out of sheer desperation. He's like a lame duck dictator who refuses to leave the palace.
Exactly. He becomes an exposed usurper. And because he refuses to leave, God initiates a highly concentrated, severe judicial process to literally force an eviction.
Okay, so how does that eviction actually work?
To understand the mechanics of how that unfolds, we have to look at the nested structure of the judgments. Think of the design of Russian nesting dolls.
Oh, okay. So you open the largest doll, which is the seventh seal, and inside it are all 7 trumpets. Then you open the final trumpet, the 7th trumpet, our hinge, and inside that are the 7 bowls.
You've got it. And this nested structure is vital to the math of Wong's model because it preserves 2 essential dynamics simultaneously.
Which are?
First, chronological progression, meaning time is continuously moving strictly forward. Second, literary intensification, meaning the severity of the crisis is exponentially escalating.
Okay, so it's moving forward and getting worse.
Exactly. The seals advance the broad history, the trumpets intensify the intervention, and the bowls are the terminal outpouring. They exist to complete the judicial eviction process in rapid succession.
And that eviction process brings us into the most intense and frankly mathematically complex part of the timeline, the final 75 days.
The terminal dismantling, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Once the seventh trumpet sounds and the beast's lease expires at day 1260, the timeline enters a highly compressed 75-day window.
Just 75 days.
Right. Wong breaks this final stretch down into two distinct phases, starting with a 30-day interim that runs from day 1260 to day 1290.
Okay, but looking at the architecture of the model, I gotta push back here. The pacing here feels like a massive chronological traffic jam.
How so?
How can Wong justify fitting all 7 of the bowl judgments, which sound like global catastrophic events, into a tiny 30-day window, especially when the seals and trumpets took years to unfold? Are we cramming an impossible amount of narrative into a single month?
It sounds like it, right?
Yeah.
But Wong addresses that exact pacing issue by analyzing the literary nature of the texts.
Okay.
See, the earlier judgments, the seals and trumpets, have explicit durations or developmental stages attached to them in the text. For example, the fifth trumpet explicitly mentions a 5-month duration.
Right, there's a timeline built in.
Exactly. But the bold judgments completely lack any explicit duration markers.
Oh, so they aren't eras or epochs, they're just rapid fire events.
Yeah. Revelation explicitly calls them the finishing stage of divine wrath. They represent a climactic judicial cascade.
Cascade, yeah.
The very imagery of a bowl being poured out implies a rapid, uninterrupted, and overwhelming succession. Furthermore, they are highly targeted.
Targeted at what?
They are aimed directly at the beast's worshippers, his literal throne, and his administrative center. It is a strategic, aggressive dismantling of a collapsing kingdom.
Wow, okay. So, because his administration is being systematically destroyed by these bold judgments over those 30 days, the beast basically runs out of political options.
He's desperate.
Right. He is backed into a corner, losing his grip on the global populace, and that sheer desperation forces his hand on day 1290.
Day 1290 is the breaking point. This is the precise moment the Abomination of Desolation finally occurs in Wong's timeline.
And the mathematical calculation here relies on Daniel 12 point rule of 1, right? Which says there will be 1290 days from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished.
Exactly.
Since the beast stopped the sacrifices at the start of his 42-month reign at the 1260-day midpoint, you add this 30-day interim of bold judgments, and that lands you exactly on day 1290 for the actual desecration.
Yes, the math lines up perfectly. The measuring line that protected the inner sanctuary is finally removed. The beast, whose kingdom is literally crumbling around him in darkness and rebellion, finally intrudes into the holy place.
Man, this sequence completely flips the traditional script, because he isn't confidently striding into the temple at the height of his power to kick off some golden era of his reign.
Not at all.
This isn't the start of his power. This is his final, frantic, blasphemous assertion. He is a collapsing ruler pulling a desperate theological stunt. He sets up an image of himself and demands absolute worship because, well, he has absolutely nothing else left to leverage.
It acts as his ultimate display of self-deification, and that single event triggers the final subphase of Wong's timeline, a 45-day Great Tribulation.
Which runs from day 1290 to day 1335.
Exactly.
And according to Wong, this 45-day window is the Great Tribulation in the strictest, most severe sense of the phrase.
It is entirely unparalleled in its intensity. Because the beast has lost his underlying political and economic stability to those bold judgments, he just resorts to pure, coercive theological rebellion.
Right. He's got nothing left to lose.
Exactly. The defining feature of these final 45 days is the global enforcement of image worship. If you refuse allegiance to the beast's image, you are threatened with immediate death. It represents the most concentrated period of persecution in the entire prophetic framework.
To imagine all of that global coercion concentrated into a month and a half is just staggering. But, having survived breaking down the intense mechanics of that timeline, the source actually zooms out a bit here.
Yeah, it shifts focus.
It shifts focus to the human element, the theological impact of these final days. Specifically, Wong looks at who the text considers blessed in this terrifying landscape, and he uses his timeline to elegantly reconcile two very difficult verses.
Yeah, this is brilliant. If you look at Daniel 12.12, it pronounces a specific blessing on those who wait and reach day 1335.
Oh.
That is the day the entire chronological model culminates in the visible return of Christ. Daniel is extending a blessing to the survivors, the people who physically endure the intense persecution of the Great Tribulation, and make it to the culmination.
Right, the survivors. But then Revelation 14.1-13 says, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on,"
Right.
which immediately sounds like a glaring contradiction. I mean, are you blessed if you survive? Or are you blessed if you die?
It's confusing until you apply Wong's timeline. His 75-day terminal timeline harmonizes them by applying them to the exact same 45-day window.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, Daniel blesses the survivors who make it through day 1335. Revelation blesses the martyrs who refuse beast worship and die faithfully during that unparalleled period of coercion.
Wow.
Both texts maintain their complete integrity. They simply apply to two different groups navigating the exact same 45-day crucible. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Wong is really illustrating here is a profound contrast in perspectives during these final 75 days.
The contrasting perspectives between, like, the divine and the beast.
Exactly. Think about how these events look depending on who is observing them. From the divine perspective, as outlined by those nested judgments, these final 75 days are a continuous, strategic, and highly regulated dismantling operation.
Right.
Everything is moving inexorably toward a final confrontation. It is orderly, mathematical, and deliberate, even in its extreme severity.
But from the beast's perspective, it's pure, unadulterated chaos. It's a frantic, violent struggle to hold on to failing power as his infrastructure just collapses around him.
That's the ultimate paradox of Wong's model. The beast appears the most violent and dangerous precisely when his legitimate authority has already mathematically expired.
Because he knows he's done.
His rage intensifies not because his kingdom is secure, but because he knows the eviction is already underway.
So, why should you care about this highly specific mathematical model? I mean, even if you listening aren't heavily invested in eschatological debates, why does tracking these 1260 and 1290-day markers matter to you?
It's a fair question.
Because this paper is a masterclass in reading complex systems.
Mm.
It demonstrates how shifting just one underlying assumption, like choosing not to force the temple desecration to happen at the exact midpoint of the 7 years, can suddenly make dozens of conflicting data points click into perfect mechanical harmony.
Yeah, it forces you to let the data dictate the model rather than forcing a pre-existing model onto the data.
Exactly.
It fundamentally rewrites the narrative. Instead of the story about a villain winning unchecked for 7 years, the timeline reveals a highly regulated legal proceeding where usurper is given a strict time limit, his jurisdiction is limited, and then his empire is systematically dismantled.
Right. Let's trace the causality of what we've covered today just to lock it in. We start with the foundational 25-20-day baseline, divided into two 1260-day eras.
Right.
The first era established harlot dominance and the concurrent whistleblowing ministry of the two witnesses, which ultimately created a power vacuum when the beast assassinated them.
And that vacuum allowed the beast to begin his 42-month sanctioned reign. But his inability to breach the divinely measured temple created the protected sanctuary paradox, proving his power was geographically limited.
Then, when his 42-month lease expired at the seventh trumpet hinge, the legal transfer of authority turned him into an unlawful exposed squatter,
which necessitated the 75-day terminal dismantling. The nested bowl judgments rapidly eroded his power base over 30 days, backing him into a corner and forcing the desperate abomination of desolation on day 1290.
which triggered the final 45 days of pure theological coercion, culminating mathematically on day 1335.
Exactly.
So, what does this all mean? Again, as a final reminder, our goal today was simply to marvel at the sheer architecture of Alan S. L. Wong's chronological model. We acted as tour guides through his source material, dissecting the mechanics rather than endorsing a specific end-of-the-world timeline.
Right. We spent our time taking apart the gears of a very intricate ancient clock to see how Wong argues they fit together.
But looking at the precision of those gears leaves me with a lingering thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. Yeah, if applying this strictly sequential nested logic completely unlocks the numerical mysteries of Daniel and Revelation, how might applying this exact same chronological lens change our interpretation of other ancient historical or mythological texts?
That's a huge question.
Doesn't it make you wonder? Does ancient literature naturally demand this kind of rigid mathematical timeline? Or are we, as modern readers, sometimes imposing our own cultural craving for neat spreadsheets and perfectly balanced schedules onto ancient minds that viewed time completely differently?
It's definitely something to think about.
Keep asking questions, keep looking at the underlying logic of the things you read, and we'll see you next time.